Star's Cory Harrison early Friday morning accusing him of driving drunk.
There's a shocking twist to his story that you might not know. Turns out that beyond the glitz of TV and the humdrum of haggling, Cory has wrestled with some pretty dark demons.
I no longer call him my father. These were the words spoken by Cory Harrison when he decided to expose a crime so unimaginable that even the people of America would find it hard to fathom. His father, Rick Harrison. His words not only shocked the public, but also opened the door to a hell that no one ever thought could exist behind a beloved television show watched by millions. This is not a simple scam, nor is it a private scandal. This is a sophisticated criminal network that has been operating for over 2 decades, with secret basements, bodies displayed like historical artifacts, and a crime syndicate quietly functioning right in the heart of Las Vegas, perfectly shielded by the spotlight, media fame, and the blind trust of millions of fans. What would drive a son to sever all ties of blood, to reveal the truth about his own father? What could be so horrifying that it would turn a family show into a crime scene? And most importantly, are you ready to face the full truth behind this story? 1. The fall of a television legend. Pawn Stars, the reality TV show centered around the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, is not just an entertainment program. It has become a cultural phenomenon. When it premiered in 2009, the show quickly attracted over 7 million viewers per episode at its peak, making it one of the most prominent features of History Channel in the 2010s. Audiences tuned in to Pawn Stars not only to see old items being appraised, but also to experience the warm family atmosphere, where 3 generations of the Harrison family would come together to debate, negotiate, and share their extensive historical knowledge. Rick Harrison is the central figure of the show. With his sharp negotiation skills, expertise in antiques, and ability to craft a story from every item, he has come to symbolize the American dream. A man who didn't come from wealth but, through intelligence and hard work, built an empire. He is not just a businessman. He is a storyteller, transforming history into an emotionally valuable product. The image of Rick, along with his father, known as the Old Man, and his son Cory, has become an icon associated with authenticity, family bonds, and generational inheritance. For this reason, the life sentence without parole for Rick Harrison, convicted of the illegal possession and display of human remains, along with other serious charges, caused a deep shock in the fan community and the television industry. This was no longer just a personal scandal, but the complete collapse of a brand that had been built on public trust for over a decade. However, the most crushing blow didn't come from the courtroom. It came from within the family, the very place where everyone once believed that familial bonds were untouchable. In an interview filmed in a dimly lit, quiet setting, Cory Harrison, the son who had stood by Rick's side through hundreds of episodes, chose to break his silence. Not only did he refuse to defend his father, but he also called him pure evil, a chilling label with no room for forgiveness. This event completely upended the public's perception of Pawn Stars. What once seemed like harmless memories of humorous situations, lighthearted history lessons, and engaging negotiations now lay shrouded in a fog of suspicion, disgust, and anger. Fan forums quickly shifted from debating the origin of an ancient coin to asking, "How long have we been lied to?" Notably, Rick's conviction, reached after over a year of investigation, was not only based on physical evidence obtained from his home, storage units, and pawn shops, but was also supported by Cory's detailed testimony. He not only took the stand as a witness, but also publicly declared himself a living testament, someone who had once lived in that darkness, but lacked the courage to confront it until the truth could no longer be denied. Since then, public opinion no longer viewed this as just a high-profile case. It became a modern tragedy, where the spotlight masked the truth and trust was stolen by those the public had once admired. And like all other tragic stories, it didn't end with a courtroom verdict. It began the moment a son chose to expose the past. 2. From silence to breaking point. After the verdict for Rick Harrison was announced on a February morning, one of the darkest mornings in the history of American reality TV, all eyes were on one person, Cory Harrison. However, he did not appear at the trial. He did not make any statements to the press. There were no posts on social media, no shares on the platforms that had once been the familiar connection between him and his fans. Cory had completely disappeared. This silence, amidst the media storm that was sweeping through every forum, not only attracted attention but also caused widespread confusion. Rumors spread quickly. Was Cory being controlled? Was he preparing legal actions to protect himself? Or worse, was he somehow involved in this criminal network? A person who had worked side by side with his father for hundreds of episodes. Someone who was the direct heir to the pawn shop. Could he really be completely innocent? The theories grew denser. Investigative articles were published non-stop. Old photos, forgotten scenes from Pawn Stars were now being meticulously reviewed. Online users began to question, were those moments when Cory seemed uneasy, those glances at his father, those endless arguments, subtle cries for help that no one had heard? Yet, amidst all the noise, Cory remained silent. 4 days after the trial, he was found in a small hotel in downtown Los Angeles, living in total isolation, without an assistant, without bodyguards, without media. He did not respond to any calls, not even from close friends. The paparazzi, who stood outside for hours, could not capture any images, except for the constantly closed curtains. Cory was not hiding, but he did not want to be found. It wasn't until the 5th day that the silence finally shattered. Not through a press release, not through a social media post, but through a phone call. Cory had reached out to Elijah Rodas, an independent documentary filmmaker who had worked on the early episodes of Pawn Stars and was one of the few people Cory trusted completely. "It's time," Cory said. "I don't want to carry this in my head for the rest of my life." Elijah didn't need to ask anything more. The two of them met at an Airbnb-style rental house in the Hollywood Hills. No crew, no lights, just a camera mounted on a tripod, an unopened bottle of whiskey on the table, and a man ready to reveal things that would send shivers down America's spine. The first thing Cory said was not about his father, but about himself. "I've been silent for too long," he said, his voice hoarse, eyes not looking at the camera. "And I know that makes me an accomplice in the eyes of many. Maybe it's true." No tears, no excuses, just a cold acknowledgement, like the removal of a bandage from a wound that was beginning to rot. Cory recalls the first time he suspected something was wrong, when he was only 16. One evening after the shop had closed, while rummaging through the old baseball card collection in the back room, he came across a filing cabinet that was locked with a chain. His teenage curiosity overcame his fear. He picked the lock. Inside, there were black and white photographs, most of them yellowed with age. The corpses, mostly lying still, their eyes open, skin pale like wax, were arranged in a scene as if it were an art exhibit. Some of the people in the photos he recognized. They had once been customers of the pawn shop. At that moment, Cory didn't say anything. Not because he didn't know who to tell, but because he couldn't believe what he had just seen. He locked the cabinet again, as if that simple action could somehow lock away the memory that was screaming in his mind. In the years that followed, he witnessed even stranger things, suitcases being brought in through the back door at midnight, rooms in the shop always locked, even though he was the official manager. Arguments between his father and strange men, dressed like businessmen but acting like spies. Whenever he asked, Rick would only say, "Don't worry about it, son. That's history you're too young to understand." Cory began to doubt. Then he convinced himself that it was just his wild imagination, that his father was a strange person, but couldn't possibly be the monster he had imagined in his nightmares. However, over time, the evidence became undeniable. One day, he discovered a suitcase in his father's car filled with photographs of corpses, accompanied by handwritten notes, like a preservation dossier. Another time, he found a room in the basement with medical lighting and the smell of formalin, the chemical used to preserve biological specimens. Then, after the FBI raided the secret storage areas, Finding bodies along with videotapes containing Rick's voice, Cory couldn't stay silent any longer. But he still didn't speak. Not until he received a handwritten note from his father. Just 5 hastily scrawled words. "You always knew." Silence. The words weren't long, but they were like a bullet piercing through the remnants of his mind. The sense of family, the bond of blood, and the illusion that perhaps his father would regret his actions. No, Rick didn't regret it. He only regretted that Cory knew, and feared Cory would speak out. Cory couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, he called Elijah. The interview lasted 57 minutes. No cuts, no effects. Just one man facing the truth of his own life. He talked about how he had wanted to call the police but feared being labeled the crazy son. He had written a journal of more than 200 pages, documenting every strange event over time, complete with photos, notes, and even hair samples. That journal is now in the hands of the FBI, one of the key pieces of evidence that helped charge Rick Harrison. What kept the public glued to that video wasn't just the shocking information Cory revealed, but his expression. No longer the cheerful big hoss on screen, but a thin man, his eyes heavy, his mouth seeming to apologize to each victim, not with words, but with the presence of truth. And that was the moment America realized. This wasn't just a criminal investigation. It was a cultural shock. A son had finally broken the silence, not only to convict his father, but to end the web of lies millions had believed to be the truth. 3. The confession. Shocking revelations. When Cory Harrison's nearly 1-hour interview video began circulating on the internet, initially just a short clip posted by an anonymous account on a file-sharing site, followed by the entire video being leaked, the public expected to hear the raw emotions, disappointments, or sadness of a son witnessing the fall of his father. But what they received went far beyond what any television scriptwriter could imagine. What Cory shared was not just emotional or subjective speculation, it was evidence, memories, and chillingly detailed descriptions of a criminal process that was being nurtured and operated right beneath the surface of a reality TV show. The first time Cory suspected his father might not be the man he had always trusted was when he was just 16 years old. It wasn't because Rick had done anything specific, but because of a chance discovery one evening when he stayed at the store after hours. In the old storage area, Cory accidentally stumbled upon a locked filing cabinet, which was unusual since most of the store's documents were kept in a haphazard manner, without anything particularly sensitive. Curious, Cory used a lock-picking tool. Inside, he found photographs. No captions, no frames, just black and white pictures, some of which had faded, depicting corpses. Unlike forensic files, these bodies were placed in very strange settings. A woman lying on an antique bed, with a grandfather clock beside her. A man in a prayerful pose, dressed in Civil War-era military uniform. A little girl sitting among old toys, her eyes wide open and vacant. At that moment, I couldn't believe my eyes, Cory recalled. I kept telling myself, these must be fake. Maybe this is part of some art project my dad is preserving. But the fear didn't come from the photos. It came from the feeling Cory had when he closed the cabinet door. It felt like I had just crossed a threshold, and I couldn't turn back anymore. Then came a series of small details that, if overlooked, people would easily ignore. But when pieced together, as Cory did in his journal, they painted a disturbing picture. His father often went out in the middle of the night, carrying a shovel and gloves, saying he was going treasure hunting. But these treasures never appeared. Rick also had a private room at the store that even the security guard wasn't allowed to enter. Whenever Cory asked, he would simply reply, "That's the archive. Archive." Then there was a smell, one Cory couldn't quite describe, but that always haunted him. Not a decaying smell, but a strong chemical disinfectant odor, like in a biological lab. However, the turning point, as Cory confessed, came when he accidentally opened Rick's suitcase in the trunk of his SUV and discovered new photos, this time color, high resolution, of human corpses in a controlled lighting environment. Each photo had handwritten captions in Rick's own handwriting. Acquisition 004, shoulder adjustment, 1997 non-sile, skull check, ensure intact femur, historical value. Bon. There was no longer any doubt. His father wasn't just doing something related to history or collecting. This wasn't artifact preservation. This was the preservation of humans. I didn't call the police. I didn't ask anyone. I just locked it up, drove home, and couldn't sleep that night, Cory shared, his voice growing heavy. I knew if I spoke up, I'd lose everything. My family, my job, maybe even my freedom. And for many years after that, he lived with two versions of himself. A son on television, always trying to appear happy and open, and a silent witness, always waiting for the worst to happen.
The silence continued until the FBI conducted a series of raids at storage facilities related to Rick Harrison. At the warehouses belonging to Harrison Asset Protection LLC, authorities discovered over 38 human bodies. Some of the bodies were preserved in industrial refrigerators, while others were placed in glass containers, labeled with identification codes, dates, and personal items such as watches, necklaces, and notebooks. Some of the bodies were those of people who had gone missing 2 decades earlier, while others were unidentified children. All these bodies were strangely arranged like specimens, almost resembling a living museum. This undeniable evidence led the FBI to further investigate the relationships within the family. However, Cory was the first to voluntarily come forward to provide information. He handed over his personal journal, which he had kept for 10 years, where he meticulously recorded every suspicion, time, location, descriptions, and even illustrations. One entry in the journal even accurately described storage facility number 3, where the conjoined twin bodies were found, before the authorities released that information. This proved that Cory knew a lot and had chosen to remain silent until he could no longer bear it. However, Cory's confession did not stop at merely providing information. It was a profound spiritual transformation. In the video he shared, "I am not a victim. I am the one who saw, who knew, but didn't act in time. I cannot forgive myself for that." This was a form of self-condemnation, not only to release his guilt, but also as a way to atone for his mistakes. He refused all commercial interview offers, declined to write a book, and turned down any royalties that could be made from this story. "I don't want to turn pain into profit. I just want the truth to be seen." Beyond the bodies, Cory revealed a chilling detail: the secret room in Rick's basement. He had entered it only once, when he was 25, as part of a coming-of-age ritual created by his father. The room was cold, lit by dim blue lights, with a strong chemical smell, and shelves of glass containers filled with specimens, each labeled with identification numbers, with a stainless steel table in the center, much like a coroner's office. Rick only said one thing: "This is where history waits to be told." That statement haunted Cory in his dreams for years afterward, because he understood. His father no longer saw the victims as human. He viewed them as tools to rewrite a history that only he controlled. Psychologists refer to this behavior as delusional archivism, a syndrome obsessed with preserving people, where an individual believes that keeping these people is a way to save them from being forgotten. FBI psychiatrists believe Rick exhibited this syndrome to an extreme degree, combined with a desire for absolute control and an obsession with a distorted history. This explains why he not only killed people but also displayed them, as if he were honoring them, when in reality, he was manipulating their memories. At the end of the interview, when asked, "If your father is watching this video, what would you say to him?" Cory didn't respond immediately. He stared into the camera for a long time, then said, "I'm no longer his son." This statement was not just a rejection of his bloodline, it was a declaration of liberation. A final break between the person who once lived in silence and fear and the one now choosing to stand on the side of truth. The truth may not save the past, but it can prevent similar things from happening in the future. And in that moment, Cory Harrison was no longer someone overshadowed by his father's fame, but the first person to dare expose the truth behind it. 4.
the dark side of an empire. If Cory Harrison's confession opened a door into a world filled with perversion and obsession, then what the FBI uncovered during its investigation revealed the inner workings of an underground empire, where history is distorted, corpses are commodified, and television fame is exploited as a shield for criminal activities. Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, the famous pawn shop in Las Vegas, was once a symbol of the American dream, a family business that grew from nothing, where people not only exchanged antiques, but also learned about history, culture, and the value of memories. On television, it was portrayed as a living museum, where the past could be traded for cash and smiles. But behind those smiles was an underground machine, where Rick Harrison ran a sophisticated criminal operation that lasted for over 2 decades. According to FBI and Interpol investigation reports, this operation was divided into 3 layers, each serving as a protective veil, perfectly concealing its activities and very difficult to detect. The first layer was the public-facing facade, the pawn shop, the television show, social media activities, charity work, educational sponsorships, and historical workshops. Rick crafted an image of himself as an intellectual businessman, knowledgeable and approachable. He frequently appeared at artifact preservation conferences, spoke before the U.S. Congress on the rights of small businesses, and represented the Las Vegas community at numerous public events. This constant presence made him appear beyond suspicion, because people generally believe that those who stand in the public eye can do no wrong in the shadows. The second layer was the underground business network, comprising assets, shell companies, and secret channels of operation. The FBI identified at least 7 companies registered under Rick or trusted associates, including Harrison Asset Protection LLC, Silver Cross Holdings, and Nevada Heritage Curation. These companies had no clear business activities, no websites, no official employees, but they did have registered warehouses, international bank accounts, and unusual transactions amounting to tens of millions of dollars every year. This network was used by Rick to transport, store, and trade special artifacts, including human corpses, biological tissue, and items presented as historical relics. The third layer, the deepest and most difficult to uncover, was Rick's system of clients. According to data retrieved from encrypted hard drives and personal notebooks, Rick organized secret auctions for a group of ultra-wealthy clients, including collectors, business people, and even some political figures. These events were never recorded, had no invitations, no invoices, only handwritten lists with coded symbols. A typical auction took place at private estates in suburban Nevada, where Rick showcased special pieces as historical artifacts: a human skull labeled Napoleonic Era, unverified, a mummified hand with a note reading Middle East, pre-Islamic fragment, or even a glass tube containing a sample of congealed blood labeled Kennedy lineage, subject K4. After being tested, some of these specimens were confirmed to be real human remains, with DNA matching missing persons cases reported in the US, Canada, and several Asian countries. The key factor that allowed this system to operate undetected for so long was Rick's exploitation of his television fame to legitimize his transportation activities. By labeling shipments as valuable antiques or props for filming, he managed to bypass customs checks or receive exemptions at certain airports through sponsorship agreements with media channels. Some former employees even confirmed that they were required to sign a historical confidentiality agreement, a document that instructed them not to disclose any information regarding non-traditional restoration activities. At first, many thought this was just a legal precaution. Now they realized it was a way to turn them into unwitting accomplices. Cory Harrison, who held the position of financial manager from 2012 to 2017, later revealed that approximately 20% of the merchandise labeled as unidentified was recorded in the accounting system under the category internal storage, not for sale. These items were not put up for sale. No profit or loss was recorded, and they were stored in the basement area known as the archive. On one occasion, Cory tried to access the archive's ledger to investigate the reasons for the ongoing losses over several months, but his access was denied. Rick called him into his office and simply said, "If you open that safe, don't. There's something heavier than money in there." From a systems analysis perspective, Rick had created a secret museum model, a place where victims became exhibits, and death was recreated through a layer of aesthetic paint and academic language. Some FBI reports describe how Rick even created fake records for the specimens, along with fabricated backstories, such as a man referred to as the Balkan warrior of the 19th century, despite DNA testing revealing he was a Texas engineer who had been missing since 2003. For Rick, every corpse was a story to be sold. Modern criminal psychology theory refers to this as historical ownership delusion, a behavioral disorder where an individual believes they have the right to preserve, recount, and manipulate humanity's memories at their will. The terrifying part is that when the individual holds power and public admiration, they can legitimize all their actions. Rick Harrison, with 500 episodes aired, over 80 million views monthly, and tens of millions of dollars in revenue, did just that. A former FBI agent who investigated the case compared Rick's empire to a museum of hell. Meticulously organized, beautifully arranged, but each shelf held a horrifying, untold story. And what's even more frightening is that this empire was built on the trust of the public. During a meeting with investigators, Cory said something that silenced the entire room. "We didn't kill anyone, but we sold tickets to watch." And that was the deepest confession, not only for a personal crime, but also for a society that inadvertently encouraged it. From the secret auction invitations to the carefully packed specimens, and even the way Rick set up surveillance cameras to capture the customer reactions as they gazed at the corpses. Everything proved that this was not a case of losing control, but rather a sophisticated machine, a model for commercializing death. And for many years, Gold and Silver Pawn Shop was not just a store. It was essentially a warehouse, a destination for human artifacts, waiting their turn to be exhibited. 5. Acceptance and repentance. In the multitude of stories about individuals exposing the crimes of their own family members, none are as complex and painful as the case of Cory Harrison. He wasn't an outsider who stumbled upon wrongdoing and decided to reveal the truth. He was an integral part of the story. He grew up in that very house, walked through the store that would later be identified as the center of organized criminal activities. Most importantly, he was the son of the man who led that network, the man who taught him about negotiation, valuation, and a love for history. This made Cory's confession not just a simple report, but a journey of self-transformation, both an internal shift and a public revelation. On television, people knew Cory as Big Hoss, a man who appeared lazy, easily irritable, yet full of affection. He was the heir to Rick's legacy, the right-hand man in every transaction, someone who occasionally disagreed with his father but never left his side. And throughout hundreds of episodes, no one suspected that this man was living between two worlds, one of public glamour and another of growing darkness. There was no sudden moment of clarity, Cory said in an interview. "It's not like in the movies, where you open a door and see everything. For me, it was a series of small events stretching back to childhood. From the first photograph, the forgotten suitcase, to the first time he discovered the basement room, each detail gradually formed a picture he didn't want to face. But the more he tried to avoid it, the clearer the picture became. And it was this hesitation, not speaking out, not acting, not acknowledging, that burdened Cory with a weight he could only later name silence can kill, not immediately but slowly and surely. In some ways, Cory was also a victim of prolonged psychological manipulation. Rick Harrison wasn't the authoritarian or violent type of father. He loved his son, taught him, and passed on a passion for history, antiques, and preserving things that were gradually being forgotten. This blurred all of Cory's initial doubts, because in his heart, his father was trustworthy, the man who helped him grow up. He used to say, "We're not just traders, we're guardians of history," Cory recalled. "I used to believe that. I used to feel proud. until I realized what we were preserving wasn't history, but its distortion. This realization didn't happen overnight. It was the accumulation of thousands of moments Cory tried to ignore. The way his father went out at 3 a.m., the strange meetings with clients that were never recorded, the items hidden deep in storage, off limits to everyone, and the change in Rick's gaze, something Cory described as the look of someone who had stopped seeing people as human. Then came the remorse, the most painful phase, and the reason Cory's interview video caused such a stir. Unlike witnesses who often try to distance themselves from crimes to protect themselves, Cory chose to confront his role. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't pack any bodies. But I saw the signs and I stayed silent. I had the chance to speak up, many times, but I didn't. Maybe if I'd spoken up earlier, someone wouldn't have gone missing. Someone wouldn't have become just a number in my father's archive. That admission wasn't easy. Psychologists call it parallel shame, a state where a person feels both betrayed and guilty for not preventing terrible things from happening. For Cory, it was a vicious cycle lasting years. He doubted, he feared, he stayed silent, then doubted again. Each cycle was a new scar on his soul, and when the truth was revealed, those scars turned into an unstoppable emotional storm. Therefore, Cory's public confession wasn't just an act of cooperation with the FBI, it was also a step towards self-healing. After numerous post-interview meetings, Cory declined all media offers, every post-scandal TV show, and especially any opportunity to profit from his own story. Instead, he spent time with the investigative team, providing copies of personal journals, cross-referencing images and details about underground storage rooms, and even helping experts identify certain artifacts Rick referred to as unidentifiable. Beyond that, Cory established a support fund for the families of victims, those who lost loved ones during the years Rick operated in secrecy. This fund doesn't bear the Harrison name. It's named after a woman named Ava, the first victim Cory suspected his father had killed after noticing her name and appearance matched a preserved body in a glass container from 2004. I can't bring them back, but I can do everything to ensure what's left isn't forgotten. There was a moment in the interview that made many viewers take notice again. When Elijah Rhodes, the interviewer, asked Cory, "Do you think your father regrets it?" Cory didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the floor and said, "No, he doesn't think he did anything wrong. He thinks he's doing something noble. He once told me, 'We don't kill, we preserve.' If not for me, who would tell their stories?" That statement is the clearest evidence of the distortion in Rick Harrison's ideology, and also the reason Cory decided to sever ties. If he truly believes he's doing the right thing, then I can't save him, but I can save others from being deceived by that belief. Cory didn't apologize to seek forgiveness. He apologized because he needed to, not for himself, but for everyone who once believed in Pawn Stars, who once believed in Rick Harrison, and who once believed that history could be preserved without harm. I don't want to be a hero. I don't need to be called a survivor. I just want to be called by the right name, the one who saw and finally spoke out. 6. Collapse of a legacy. No one could have predicted that a television show about antiques, filled with light-hearted bargaining and everyday historical stories, would end up at the center of one of the most serious cultural and legal scandals in American TV history. Yet after the dark secrets behind Pawn Stars were brought to light, sparked by Cory Harrison's confession and a series of investigations that stretched over a year, the shockwaves spread like a media tsunami, wiping out everything Rick Harrison had painstakingly built over nearly 2 decades. The first and most immediate reaction came from the loyal viewer community. Millions of fans, people who had treated Pawn Stars as part of their family routine, who used to re-watch old episodes to unwind at the end of the day, suddenly felt betrayed. Social media platforms like Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter were flooded with posts filled with anger, disappointment, and disbelief. Many expressed that they had once seen the show as a mental escape, a space where fathers and sons could explore history together. Now, those memories were overshadowed by a terrifying realization that behind those on-screen smiles might lie corpses, blood, and secrets too horrifying to imagine. One post on the subreddit r/pawnstars, formerly the most active fan community with over 200,000 members, received more than 50,000 upvotes in just 24 hours. Its title read, "I once took my son to the shop to meet Rick. Now, I just want to erase that memory." Another user commented, "We didn't just lose a show, we lost our faith in something we thought was harmless." The outrage wasn't confined to the internet. In Las Vegas, just 48 hours after Cory's video was leaked, groups of fans began gathering outside the gold and silver pawn shop. But they weren't there to take photos or shop. They came to protest. They held signs, photos of missing individuals, and even memorabilia they had once purchased from the store, now thrown on the ground or set on fire. An elderly woman, clutching a photo of Rick with her granddaughter from 2012, broke down in tears when speaking to a reporter. "I used to think he was a man of the people. Turns out, he's a smiling monster." The anger soon reached the television industry itself. History Channel, the official broadcaster of Pawn Stars, immediately pulled the entire show from its TV schedule and digital platforms, including Hulu, Amazon Prime, and YouTube. And, in a hastily released press statement, the network declared, "We are shocked and deeply disturbed by the revelations. All content involving Rick Harrison will be reviewed and removed to prevent further harm to the public." However, this move was not enough to calm the storm of public outrage. A class action lawsuit was filed in federal court by a group of viewers, accusing History Channel of gross negligence in content oversight and of enabling criminal behavior by helping to build a positive image for Rick Harrison. Experts in the field of media believe that this is the first time in the history of modern television that a famous figure has not been canceled due to misleading statements or questionable ethical behavior, but because they are involved in serious criminal activity with a level of brutality beyond imagination. The media, which once portrayed Rick as a wise and trustworthy uncle, has now completely turned its back on him. A slew of talk shows, podcasts, and social analysis programs quickly brought the issue to the table for discussion and dissection. Some hosts have even publicly apologized for having collaborated with or praised Rick in the past. The impact of the case extends far beyond the United States. Both the Smithsonian Institution, UNESCO, and Interpol have launched independent investigations into the suspicion that Rick Harrison may have been involved in an international smuggling ring of antiquities, violating the Hague Convention on the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. The artifacts found in the storage, including ancient Sumerian stone tablets, Egyptian burial urns, and pieces of bone inscribed with ancient Chinese characters, are suspected to have been stolen from museums and archaeological sites in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. A representative from UNESCO described the case as a serious offense against the cultural memory of humanity. At the heart of this storm is none other than Cory Harrison. From being a person under suspicion, he has become a beacon of hope for the public to cling to in their quest for justice and truth. While no one can completely erase the wounds left by Rick's crimes, for many, Cory's decision to speak out has marked a turning point. On many online forums, he is referred to as the person who brought the truth back. Not because he is perfect or innocent, but because he had the courage to acknowledge his own part in the matter and chose to act when there was still a chance to make a difference. Today, social seminars and communication courses are beginning to use the Pawn Stars case as a textbook example of the dark side of fame, and how public images can sometimes be used as a smokescreen to hide the truth. New questions are emerging. Are we placing blind faith in what is presented on screen? How many signs have we ignored simply because we were too absorbed in entertainment? And if Cory had not spoken out, would the truth ever have come to light? The legacy that Rick Harrison once left, which was once one of the leading icons of reality television, is now reduced to ashes. But even in the midst of the ruins, a valuable light still shines, the courage of a son who dared to break the silence. It is this act, In a world where the line between truth and fiction is increasingly blurred, that has become a symbol of hope. No truth can remain hidden forever, even if it is wrapped in the bright lights of television, in meticulously crafted episodes, or in fake laughter and emotions. In the end, the truth will find a way to reveal itself. Cory Harrison, the son who many thought was just a shadow next to his father, became the spark that ignited this awakening. He sacrificed his reputation, his peace, and even the last beautiful memories of his family, just to break the silence and expose an empire built on lies, control, and crime. Cory isn't seeking forgiveness. He doesn't need to be hailed as a hero, but he did the most important thing in a world where the truth is often distorted. He dared to call out the monster, even though it had the face of his own father. And because of that, millions of people were awakened from their illusions. That broken legacy, if it has any value at all, is the lesson. Sometimes, to protect history, we must be brave enough to face its darkest chapters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to keep up with the developments in this shocking case. The truth never sleeps, and neither do we.